There's a moment when your name is said in a certain tone, a subtle jab, a cold glance, a question that isn't really a question, it's a test, and in that split second, your whole body tenses. You want to speak, to explain, to clear the air before the story gets worse. But what if I told you that's the trap? The moment you speak, they've already won, because now you're reacting, now you're trying, and trying is proof that they struck something soft. You've felt it, haven't you, that sinking feeling when someone questions your intent in front of others? When you're called arrogant, cold, manipulative, and your instinct screams, "That's not me," so you explain. And as you explain, you watch their eyes shift, not softer, but hungrier, like they've drawn blood. Because they didn't need to be right, they just needed you to respond. Most people defend themselves because they want to be seen clearly. But in doing so, they become invisible, because in power, clarity is a weakness, stillness is fearsome. Silence is presence. What if this time you didn't explain? What if you stared through them like smoke? Let the room hear the echo of their accusation, without you ever touching it. You're not here to be understood. You're here to be untouchable. Let's begin. You didn't defend yourself because it made sense. You defended yourself because you felt it. That pull in your chest, that fire behind your eyes, that storm of thoughts that said, "If I don't say something right now, they'll believe it's true." That's the lie. The truth is, explaining yourself is rarely a strategy, it's a bleed. An emotional leak disguised as logic. And the worst part, you think you're gaining control, but you're not. You're surrendering it, quietly, voluntarily, because power doesn't move like that. It doesn't rush to fix perceptions. It lets perceptions fracture and reform on their own, like ice under pressure. You've seen it in relationships. Someone says, "You've changed," and suddenly you're pulling memories like receipts, trying to prove your heart, hoping they'll see what you meant. But every word you give them feeds the fire they lit. Not because you're wrong, but because you're already kneeling. Or in the office, someone throws shade on your ideas, a small, public comment. That sounds risky. And before you even breathe, you're already listing numbers, strategies, justifications. Your mouth moves fast. But your power moves out the back door, because the person who defends first is always reacting, and reaction is blood in the water. That's what they wanted, not the truth, just the twitch, that flicker in your eyes, that shift in your posture, that signal that you care too much about their opinion. But what if you didn't? What if your silence was more unsettling than their accusation? What if your pause made them hear themselves louder? Most people speak from a need to be seen. The Machiavellian speaks only when silence is too powerful to break. He doesn't seek to clarify, he seeks to control. Control doesn't come from begging to be understood. It comes from shaping the air around you, from letting the room feel your decision not to respond. Because when you don't explain, they have to explain you. And here's the brutal truth. Every time you justify, you shrink. Not in size, but in mystery, in weight, in presence. You become predictable, human, touchable. But when you don't move, when you simply hold the stare, you become something else. You become unreadable, and unreadable is unforgettable. They won't admit it, but they'll talk about you later. He just sat there. She didn't even blink. I don't know what that meant. And those words, they don't hurt your image, they build your legend. So the next time your heart races and your tongue begs for release, remember this: explaining is closure for the weak, stillness is strategy for the strong. Let them wonder. Let them twist, let them fall into the silence you didn't break. That's not cold, that's calculated. That's power without noise, and it always starts with one choice. Don't speak, don't fix, don't flinch. Let them reach for the meaning, and give them none. Power isn't about who's right. It never was. It's about who frames the room. Because once someone controls the frame, they don't need the facts, they don't need the truth. They own the lens through which everyone else sees you. And you're stuck defending your reflection in their mirror. Think of it like this. You walk into a room where someone already whispered, watch how defensive he gets, and now even your calmest words look like panic. Even your silence looks like a mask, because you accepted their premise. You're playing in their arena. And every move you make confirms the story they already started writing. But what if you refused the invitation? What if you walked into that room and held your ground, not through words, but through posture, through unbothered stillness, through complete detachment? Let me show you what that looks like. Sophia Blake is the founder of a billion-dollar biotech firm, tough, brilliant, a little too composed, if you ask her competitors. One day, an anonymous employee leaks an email calling her cold, calculating, unfit to lead. It spreads, it trends. The press asks for a statement. She says nothing. 3 days pass, no tweet, no press release, no interview. People start guessing. Why isn't she saying anything? Is it true, or is she above it? The silence becomes a storm of speculation. The original story weakens. It starts sounding emotional, bitter. The accuser begins to post more, trying harder. And with every post, they sound smaller. Then, without warning, Sophia appears at a panel, confident, neutral. She answers every question, except the one about the leak. Not avoidance, not fear. She simply acts like it never happened. The audience notices. They whisper. They compare her stillness to the accuser's noise. And just like that, the frame flips. No statement, no battle, just presence. That's the art. Most people rush to fight the headline, to scrub the rumor, to argue for their side. But the Machiavellian doesn't fight stories. He waits until the story eats itself. He knows that if you don't give energy to the frame, it loses weight. It collapses under its own emptiness. Because here's the rule: whoever defines the meaning defines the reality, and the moment you defend, you accept their definition. So what do? You steal the frame, not by force, but by refusal. You refuse to validate their stage. You don't play their character. You don't step into their spotlight. And in doing so, you force the crowd to ask, if he's not reacting, are we sure this is even real? That's when power shifts. Not with volume, but with vacuum. Control is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't post. It doesn't explain. It lets the room shape itself around your silence. And once they start bending to your stillness, you've already won, not because you proved anything, but because you made them doubt everything. There's a moment in every social game where the real move isn't to strike, it's to reflect. Not like a mirror of kindness, a mirror of consequence. When someone attacks, most people try to block. They argue, they justify, they take the blow head on and try to reason with it. But the Machiavellian doesn't block, he tilts the mirror. He lets the strike bounce back, not through retaliation, but through silence and stillness so sharp, it makes the attacker face themselves. You want an example: a college lecture hall, 100 students, 1 professor. A sharp voice breaks through the air, loud enough for the room to hear. Honestly, your theories sound like recycled nonsense. Everyone turns to look at the professor. He doesn't flinch, doesn't scowl, doesn't even smile. He pauses. Looks at the student, waits 3 seconds, for the room begins to shift. The student, bold a moment ago, starts to fidget. Their smirk fades. They glance around for backup. But no one says a word, because the professor said nothing. And in that nothing, everything happened. The attack couldn't land. It had nowhere to go, no fuel, no response. So it turned inward. It became weight in the attacker's chest. The silence forced them to hear their own voice in a way they hadn't expected. Now they're no longer clever. They're exposed. That's the move. You don't fight the insult. You leave it floating. Let it echo. Let the attacker feel the full sound of their own intention. No interference, no redirection, just silence so still it becomes a blade. People think confrontation is a clash, words flying, logic battling logic. But the truth is, the one who controls the emotional tempo always wins, and silence is the tempo no one can outpace, because silence isn't absence, it's weight. It holds the moment, it stretches it. It forces everyone in the room to feel it, to sit in it, to question what's really happening. And in that questioning, you rise. You don't need to humiliate the attacker. You don't need to win the crowd. You just need to do what most people can't. Nothing because nothing is heavy, nothing is confusing, nothing leaves them hanging in their own echo. And the human mind can't stand that kind of vacuum. It scrambles to fill it, to explain it, to justify itself, to chase meaning. But when the target doesn't respond, the attacker becomes the target. Their aggression looks emotional, their point looks insecure. Their words look louder than they should, and suddenly they're the ones being judged, not you. That's the flip. You don't counter, you reflect, not by echoing their words, but by letting them hang alone, without applause, without pushback, without a single flinch. And in the silence they created but cannot bear, they collapse. That's the mirror, not of glass. Of power, they say silence makes you look guilty. That's only true if your silence feels weak. But when it feels chosen, when it feels still instead of stuck, silence becomes something else entirely. It becomes suspicion. And suspicion, when you hold it right, is power, because people can handle answers, even bad ones. But they can't handle not knowing. It gnaws at them, it loops in their minds, and when you give them nothing, they start creating everything. That's when control shifts. Let me show you. Aaron Blackwell is a venture capitalist, known for saying very little in meetings. One afternoon, during a pitch session in downtown Chicago, a founder challenges him mid-room. "I don't think you're even listening. You never give feedback. Why are you even here?" Everyone turns to see what Aaron will say. He doesn't. He just leans back. No change in posture, no emotion. A half-second pause, then a slight glance away. And now the room feels it. The silence, not the soft kind, the kind that presses into your skin. The founder looks around, expecting chuckles or nods of agreement. He gets none, just eyes, watching him, waiting to see what he does next. He tries again, this time softer. I just think transparency matters. Still nothing from Aaron. And suddenly, the founder isn't questioning Aaron. He's defending himself, because that's what happens when silence is deliberate. It makes others overextend, over-explain, overreach. Aaron didn't need to win the argument. He never entered it. But he won the room, not with words, with weight. People start to wonder, what does he know? Why didn't he respond? Is he seeing something the rest of us missed? And here's the key, when people start asking those questions about you, you no longer need to speak. They're now speaking for you, around you, about you. And none of them are sure what you're really thinking. That's presence, not loud, not friendly, not reactive, but undeniable. People assume your silence is strategy. They think you're holding a card. They think you're planning something smarter than they can guess, and maybe you are, or maybe you're just resting in your own gravity, because that's the truth no one wants to admit. Perception isn't shaped by what you say. It's shaped by what they think you might say, but don't. So hold your tongue, let the silence stretch. Let their minds spin, and as they try to find the answer you never gave, you become the question they can't forget. Sometimes the most powerful move is to vanish, not as a game, not as revenge, but as a statement louder than any defense, because your absence, when done right, doesn't look like retreat, it looks like elevation. Like you're too far above the noise to even hear it. That's what Natalie Carter understood. She was a high-profile defense attorney, brilliant, controlled, known for never raising her voice, never repeating herself. One day, a video surfaces, edited out of context, painting her as cold and unethical. It spreads, headlines multiply. People demand answers, but Natalie doesn't respond. No post, no tweet, no press conference, not even a lawyer's letter. She simply stops showing up where they expect her to. No panels, no interviews, no rebuttals. Just silence, and in that space, the critics scream louder. They speculate, they guess, they create theories and connect dots that never existed. And each time they speak, they look more desperate, more unstable, like they're fighting a ghost that refuses to fight back. Because Natalie isn't hiding, she's watching, and she's letting the noise collapse under its own weight. That's the deeper tactic. It's not just about staying quiet. It's about withdrawing your energy entirely. Not to punish them, to unanchor them. Most people rely on your presence, even in conflict. especially in conflict. They want a reply, a reaction, a signal that they still matter. Even hate needs eye contact, so when you take that away, they spiral, they question themselves, they talk louder, hoping to fill the void you left, and in doing so, they start unraveling. Natalie returns months later, not with a statement, not with an apology. She walks into court, sharp as ever. Wins the case, walks out, no comment, no closure. The story that once burned hot now lies cold on the floor, not because it was disproven, but because it was ignored into irrelevance. This is where power transcends words, because presence isn't just being seen. Sometimes it's the echo of where you used to stand, and the longer that echo lingers, the more others bend around it. You become a shape in their minds, not just a person in the room, and that's the real game. You don't just remove yourself from the conflict, you become something they can't chase, not because you ran, because you rose. So the next time someone attacks your name, your intent, your character, don't always reply. Sometimes the sharpest edge is your absence, and in that emptiness, they'll find more fear than any sentence you could ever speak. What if you didn't just ignore the attack, but turned it inside out? What if, instead of defending yourself, you made their accusation reveal their insecurity? This isn't about being clever, it's about being surgical. The reversal isn't loud. It's quiet, it slips under their skin, not to hurt, but to expose, because most attacks aren't about you. They are about the attacker's fear, their envy, their need to feel superior. So when they call you arrogant, you don't say, "I'm not." You say, "Strange how confidence makes people uncomfortable." And when they say, "You're fake," you don't plead authenticity. You say, "Everyone says that when they stop getting what they want." These aren't comebacks, they're reflections. They don't push, they don't escalate, they just shine light and walk away, and the attacker, now they're the one explaining. Because you just changed the frame, they thought they were making you look bad, but now they're the one who looks jealous. Bitter, fragile, it's not about winning the moment, it's about flipping the emotional current beneath it. Let me show you again. You think you're better than everyone. And no, I just don't think like everyone. You're always so cold. I prefer clarity over chaos. You're manipulative. Only people who can't be influenced say that. Do you see it? Each line is short, still neutral, but it disarms, because it doesn't meet them in the emotional field. It moves the spotlight from you to them, and here's the twist. They won't admit it, but inside, something stings. Not because you fought back, but because you didn't validate their story. You turned it into a mirror, a clean, unforgiving one. Most people don't know what to do when their attack is handed back to them with a smile. They lose rhythm, they start adding context. "I didn't mean it like that. I'm just saying." And now they're the one who looks sensitive. You didn't defend, you inverted. You made their words wear different clothes, ones they didn't mean to put on. That's power, not just silence, not just presence, but precise redirection. Let them throw the punch. Then turn their own momentum into a stumble, and as they fall forward into their own echo, you walk right through the noise, still, calm, untouched. Aura isn't what you say, it's what enters the room before you do. It's the pause when your name is mentioned. It's the silence people fall into when you walk by, not because you're feared, but because you're unreadable. And the most powerful people in the world, they don't chase clarity, they cultivate confusion. Not through chaos, but through consistency. They speak less, they appear when it matters, and they choose stillness, not as a tactic, but as a signature. Steve Jobs didn't explain himself in meetings, he asked questions that made the room sweat. Rihanna rarely responds to critics, but when she walks into a fashion show, every lens moves. Daniel Day-Lewis vanishes between roles, but when he speaks, it feels like scripture. That's aura. It's not personality, it's gravity. And it's built, piece by piece, in how you react, or don't, because aura is earned in absence, in restraint, in being the one person who never overshares, never overreaches, never overperforms. You become a presence that people prepare for, even when you're not there. And here's the paradox. The more misunderstood you allow yourself to be, the more feared you become, not because they know what you'll do, but because they don't. They've seen 1,000 people get loud, break down, defend their names, clarify their hearts, but you let their noise pass through you like wind through glass. You never defend, you never explain. You just move, with the quiet confidence of someone who doesn't need to be liked to be remembered, and that shakes people. Because the world is full of those who try to prove they're good, but the ones we follow, they leave space for interpretation. They let mystery do what truth never could, because truth is fragile. Mystery builds myth, and myth becomes identity. So the next time someone tries to define you, don't hand them a label, give them silence. Let their words dissolve against your calm, and over time, they won't remember what they accused you of. They'll just remember how they felt when you looked back at them, still neutral, beyond reach. That's aura, not a mood, a force. Strength still flinches, still reacts, still bleeds a little before it strikes, but immunity doesn't even blink, it doesn't brace, doesn't wait for impact. It lets the storm pass like weather brushing a stone that's been there for centuries. That's the final shift, not from weakness to power, but from power to presence, the kind that doesn't fight back because it never enters the fight. Let me give you the scene, a podcast, live audience, 3 guests, heated debate, 1 man, sharp, loud, emotional, starts poking. He calls out the quietest man at the table. You never say what you really think, you're just playing safe. You want everyone to like you. The camera cuts, the quiet man, he picks up his glass. Sips, smiles, no sarcasm, no smirk, just stillness, and that moment explodes, the crowd shifts, the attacker's energy starts to spiral. He talks faster, louder, trying to get a rise. See what I mean? You've got nothing to say. But the crowd isn't watching him anymore. They're watching the man who said nothing, because his silence wasn't retreat, it was presence. It said, "You're not worth an answer," and that shook the table, because when someone doesn't defend themselves, it forces everyone else to reevaluate, to wonder if maybe the real strength was never in the argument. Maybe it was in the unshakable calm, and that's the truth no one teaches you. Power isn't just about control. It's about not needing to control. Most people flinch. Even when they win, they explain too much. They want the last word. But the Machiavellian doesn't need the last word. He lets the last word hang, empty, unanswered, echoing in a room that now feels colder. Because he doesn't chase understanding. He projects certainty, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself. So here's the shift. You're not trying to beat the attack anymore. You're letting it pass through you. You're not arguing your worth. You're becoming immune to the conversation. And once they realize you can't be baited, not with ego, not with insult, not with pressure, they stop trying, because no one wants to fight a shadow that never touches the ground. You don't destroy your critics. You become too still, too solid, too calm to be fun to hit. And in that stillness, they expose themselves. Let them shout, let them provoke, let them burn the oxygen trying to light a fire in you. And when there's no flame, only silence, they're the ones who melt, not you. You've been taught to defend yourself, to protect your name, to correct every misunderstanding before it spreads. But here's the truth, that need to defend, it comes from fear, fear of being misread, misjudged, misrepresented. And yet, the ones who truly hold power, they don't chase reputation, they define it. Ethan, the executive, Sophia, the CEO, Natalie, the attorney, each one stood in the fire and said nothing, not out of weakness, but out of design. Because they understood something the world keeps missing. You don't need to be seen as good, you need to be seen as grounded. Not agreeable, not soft, but certain, and certainty doesn't shout, it whispers through silence, it moves through posture. It appears in your refusal to be pulled into emotional warfare. When someone throws a jab, the average person rushes to fix the air, to clear their name, to protect their image, but you've stopped living in reaction, you live in definition. You define your tone, you define your stillness, you define the rules of engagement, and you don't enter battles that don't build your kingdom, and over time, people stop testing you, not because they're kind, but because your silence makes them cautious. They feel it in your stare, in the pause before you speak, in the way you walk away without needing to win the scene. That's not arrogance, that's architecture. You're not protecting your image. You're shaping it, like stone, through every moment. You don't flinch, and when the world spins, you stay grounded. Not because you're passive, but because you've realized the truth that power whispers to those ready to hear it. Every time you defend yourself, you lower your position, but every time you hold still, you rise. So let them talk, let them question, let them circle around your silence, looking for cracks. You're not the noise, you're the frame. And that's what they'll feel long after the words fade. If this touched something in you, don't explain it. Don't even say much, just drop one word below, aura, let the rest speak for itself.